Hey everyone, welcome back to this explainer. I'm incredibly thrilled to have you here today because we're going to unpack a piece of history that honestly reads like a high-stakes political thriller. But here's the kicker. Everything we're looking at today is grounded entirely in verified historical source material. We're diving into a declassified secret from the absolute height of the Cold War, and it is just as shocking as it is fascinating. We'll map out exactly how this unfolded step by step and separate the hard, documented facts from decades of wild speculation. Let's get into it.
I want you to let this question really sink in for a second. What if your own government proposed attacking its own citizens just to justify a war? Imagine finding out that the top military leadership of your country literally sat around a table brainstorming ways to harm their own people, all to manufacture a reason to go to war with a foreign adversary. It sounds completely impossible, right? Like the plot of some Hollywood blockbuster or maybe something a paranoid conspiracy theorist cooked up in the darkest corners of the internet.
Well, okay, let's dive into this, because as absolutely unbelievable as that premise sounds, these top-secret government documents are 100% real. This isn't some rumor, and it definitely isn't fiction. This is a documented, verified chapter of American history. We're going to walk through exactly what was proposed, who actually proposed it, and most importantly, what actually happened when this shocking plan finally made its way to the desk of the president.
Part 1, 1962, the Cold War peak.
To really understand how a proposal this extreme could even be drafted, we have to transport ourselves back to that era. It was 1962, and the Cold War was at its absolute peak. The whole world was practically vibrating with tension, locked in this massive ideological and military standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union. The fear of nuclear annihilation, that was just a daily reality for millions of people. It was a total historical pressure cooker. And tossing a massive wrench into all that intense paranoia was the number 90. That is the number of miles separating the coast of Florida from the island of Cuba. Cuba had just become America's newest and geographically most alarming enemy. Having a Soviet-aligned communist nation essentially sitting right in America's backyard, well, it created a level of panic within the U.S. government that is honestly hard to overstate today.
And things deteriorated incredibly quickly. Back in 1959, Fidel Castro takes power in Cuba, and relations with the United States pretty much instantly collapse. Fast forward a bit to 1961, and you've got the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion, a failed CIA-backed attempt to overthrow Castro. This failure was just a massive public embarrassment for the U.S. on the global stage. So by 1962, the U.S. desperately wanted Castro removed from power. But here was the major hurdle. There just wasn't enough public support for a full-scale, overt military invasion of Cuba. American military leaders felt like their hands were completely tied, and they began frantically searching for a radical new solution that could flip public opinion overnight.
Part 2. The unthinkable proposal.
So that desperate search for a catalyst, a Pearl Harbor-style event that would instantly unite the whole country in outrage against Cuba, leads us directly into one of the darkest corners of this historical record. Certain military leaders essentially concluded that if the American public wouldn't support an unprovoked war, well, then the United States would simply have to be provoked. And this dark logic led to the creation of Operation Northwoods. This was a 1962 U.S. Department of Defense proposal explicitly designed to manufacture public outrage and justify military action against Cuba. And I need to stress this. This wasn't some rogue idea scribbled on a napkin by a low-level analyst in a basement. The plan came directly from the Department of Defense and was formally signed by the highest-ranking military officer in the entire U.S. Armed Forces, General Lyman Lemnezer, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is just the sheer volume and severity of the false flag operations they actually proposed. I mean, officials systematically discussed staging horrific incidents that could be convincingly blamed on Fidel Castro's government. Just take a look at these ideas. They proposed creating fake attacks on U.S. military installations. They suggested staging the hijacking of civilian aircraft. They even discussed sinking boats carrying innocent Cuban refugees who were fleeing to Florida. And most chillingly of all, the proposal included orchestrating actual acts of terrorism right in American cities and deliberately planting evidence to frame the Cuban government. It's really heavy stuff.
Part 3. The Declassified Paper Trail.
Hearing those bullet points, honestly, it's completely natural to feel a bit skeptical. I mean, it sounds like something pulled straight out of a really cynical political thriller, right? How could we possibly know for sure that top generals sat in the Pentagon and drafted plans to commit terrorism against their own country? Well, unlike a lot of historical mysteries that rely on whispers or shady secondhand accounts, Operation Northwoods is backed by official, hard-copy government documents. In the 1990s, the U.S. government released thousands of classified Cold War records to the public, and buried deep within those mountains of historical archives was the complete, unredacted Northwoods proposal. Today, literally anyone with an internet connection can go and read the original typed pages for themselves.
To prove just how explicitly these ideas were laid out, let's take a look at this quote taken directly from the declassified files. The document coldly states, "The objective was simple: create enough public outrage to justify military action against Cuba." They absolutely weren't hiding their intentions behind a bunch of confusing bureaucratic jargon. The documents clearly show that these ideas were seriously written down, formally bound in a folder, and officially presented to the civilian leadership of the United States. No mincing words at all.
Part 4. Kennedy rejects the plan.
But before we let this document completely alter our entire view of history, we need to pause and look at what actually happened on the day this was presented to the Commander-in-Chief. Because despite the meticulous planning and those truly shocking proposals drafted by the military's top brass, Operation Northwoods was never put into action. President John F. Kennedy completely and unequivocally said no. When presented with the idea of manufacturing a war through fake terrorism, the civilian leadership drew a very, very hard line.
So the crucial point is that the system ultimately acted as a check against extreme military overreach. In the aftermath of that meeting, there is absolutely no evidence that any part of Operation Northwoods was ever carried out. Furthermore, General Lyman Lemnitzer, the man who actually signed the proposal, quickly lost the confidence of the president. He ended up leaving his position as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff shortly afterward. Today, historians generally agree that Northwoods remained exactly that, only a proposal. Obviously, it's a deeply disturbing one, for sure, but it remained firmly a proposal that was permanently shut down by the president.
Part 5. Conspiracy theories versus reality.
Because this document is just so explosive, its mere existence inevitably became high-octane fuel for countless baseless conspiracy theories. And this brilliantly illustrates the tension we so often find when studying history, navigating that tricky line between documented fact and wild speculation. On one side, we have the documented history we've just covered, a real, extreme proposal that was drafted and then outright rejected. On the other side, we have speculation. Some people take this document and argue it proves governments are willing to do absolutely anything to justify war. Others try to connect Northwoods to later actual historical tragedies, claiming that because Northwoods was drafted back then, well, similar operations must have happened in secret later on. But we have to be rigorous here. There's zero credible evidence linking Operation Northwoods to any later attacks. The existence of one rejected plan from 1962 doesn't automatically validate other claims. Those huge leaps of logic remain pure speculation.
Operation Northwoods forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. History just isn't always black and white. It's often messy, complex, and, quite frankly, deeply unsettling. Sometimes, the most unbelievable stories aren't invented by conspiracy theorists out on the fringe. They're found sitting right there inside declassified government files, gathering dust. The proposal was real, but just as importantly, the rejection of the proposal was real. History is complicated enough on its own, without us needing to invent things or jump to conclusions.
Which brings us to the question I really want to leave you with today. Looking at everything we've just covered in this explainer, does Operation Northwoods prove that governments sometimes consider the unthinkable? Or does its swift rejection by President Kennedy show that the system of checks and balances ultimately worked exactly like it's supposed to? It's a pretty heavy question, and I would love to hear how you interpret this incredible piece of declassified history. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And hey, if you enjoyed diving into this structured breakdown of real documented history, be sure to subscribe for more explainers where we uncover unbelievable true stories and separate verified facts from the speculation. Thanks so much for learning with me today, and I'll see you in the next one.